This program is brought to you by the Center for a Sustainable Today. Our world is an amazing, complex living organism, and we coexist in a symbiotic relationship. With this great power comes a great responsibility, a responsibility to ensure the future by taking steps to be sustainable today. And now, here are the hosts of Sustainable Today.
Hello, and thanks for joining us on Sustainable Today, the show that helps you take action right now to become more sustainable, both at work and at home. Today, we're talking about permaculture, a design approach based on ecological principles that create sustainable landscapes, homes, and workplaces.
I'm more of a techie than a gardener, but reading about permaculture has me thinking about ways that maybe I can make some changes in my landscaping.
I too am not a gardener, but while I was doing some research, getting ready for the show, I realized just how much my dad, who was a dedicated organic gardener, was in tune with some of the principles of permaculture way before it was called that. So we're talking 40 years ago. And now that I'm getting into gardening myself, I wish I had paid closer attention to him when I was a kid. So I'm hoping to learn a lot today.
Great. Well, so today we're joined by Toby Hemingway, author of Gaia's Garden, A Guide to Home-Scale Permaculture, and adjunct professor at Portland State University. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for coming. And of course, we've got another great 2 spotlights to share with you.
Well, first let's cover a little bit of the news. And it's nothing new that fish are contaminated with toxins. But as reported in Reuters of a recent U.S. Geological Survey study, an alarming figure was found. It said that every one of the hundreds of fish sampled from 291 freshwater streams across the U.S. had mercury in them. Now, more than 2/3 of those also exceeded the EPA levels of dangerous concentration for fish-eating mammals. I wonder if I have mercury in my mouth right now. Anyway, so that refers to us humans, and as explained in the article, the neurotoxins enter the environment chiefly as an air pollutant that's spewed into the atmosphere by industrial emissions. Now that then falls back down to the land and water surfaces, which results in the widespread toxicity of our watersheds. Now, the main culprit, might not be any surprise, is the atmospheric emissions from coal-fired power plants. I don't think anything good comes out of those smokestacks, you know. Now, the EPA intends to issue some new rules this year to further control emissions of mercury. And in the meantime, if you do eat fish, then the USGS scientists suggest that you choose species that are lower on the fish food chain to help reduce the level of mercury that winds up in your body.
Great, thanks. It's a good thing I don't eat that much fish, I suppose. Sustainable Development International reported on a study supporting what many ecologists already know, that conventional agricultural practices have detrimental effects on the landscape ecology, creating problems for long-term sustainability of crops. So in a series of sessions at the Ecological Society of America's annual meeting, ecologists presented results of a study comparing the long-term sustainability of annuals like wheat, rice, and soy that are harvested and then replanted the following year, compared to perennials that live more than 1 year despite being harvested. The study compared the physical, biological, and chemical differences between annual wheat fields and perennial grass fields in Kansas. And in each test, the researchers found perennial fields to be healthier and more sustainable ecosystems.
Yeah, I've heard about a similar thing. It's kind of like, you know, the old prairie systems. You know, those were very viable and healthy systems, and you know that's where we used to get our food.
And there aren't too many of those left.
That's right. Hey, now bear with me a while I connect a few dots in this next little story and provide you some additional food for thought. Renewable Energy World had an article on a new venture called Desert Tech. Now that's 12 large European corporations that reached an agreement to spend $50 billion over the next 40 years to generate 100 gigawatts of solar power in the deserts of both Northern Africa and the Middle East. Now, harnessing the sun's energy in the desert has been talked about for years, for solar power, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions using solar power to meet the Kyoto Protocol is getting serious attention by the EU. Now, because of the strong desert winds and the sandstorms, Desert Tech is going to use a technology called concentrated solar power, or CSP, instead of photovoltaics, whose panels are more susceptible to grainy particulate damage during a windstorm. So, where does the food come into this story? Well, here's the deal. The CPS technology requires large quantities of water for system cooling and more water to crank the steam turbines that produce the electricity. Water in the desert.
Right.
Okay, you got it. So now part of that 50 billion will be used for the construction of ocean water desalinization plants that will meet the solar power generation, cooling needs, while also supplying water for the agricultural production. So Desert Tech hopes to have its first solar power farms running in about 10 years, and perhaps its first food farms not far behind.
Energy, food, and water, they've kind of covered everything there.
I think it's a great, synergistic little system.
Sounds like a
and
good
we're going to talk
investment.
about synergistic systems this evening.
Well, that's actually a great time to move on to our topic today, permaculture, and our guest, Toby Hemingway. So, Toby, why don't we start with just the basics? Why don't you tell us what permaculture is and how it's different than the gardening most of us have done?
Sure. Well, Jane did a very nice job actually of defining permaculture as a set of design tools for creating sustainable whatever it is, if it's houses or gardens or workplaces. But it's really a toolkit to help you make decisions. I think my favorite definition, and there isn't really a good short soundbite, I wish there were, maybe applied ecology is about as good as you could get. But the way I like to define it is that if you think of things like organic farming and renewable energy and even things like social justice systems, more equitable social justice systems, or local trading systems, farmers markets that do organic food. If you think of those sorts of things as tools for sustainability, then permaculture is a toolbox that helps organize those tools and helps you decide when to use them and how. So it's not really a technique itself, it's kind of a meta technique that helps you make decisions about all the many different possible ways that you could do something. What's going to be the most sustainable? What's going to have the smallest carbon footprint? What's going to leave the ecosystem, local ecosystems, in the best shape? So that's really what it's about, is making decisions so that you can be more sustainable.
Before we move on, just to bring it back to gardening, can you sum up how it applies to the gardening side of things before we move off of that?
Sure, yeah. Well, if you think about a forest, you go into a forest, it's green, it's lush, a normal, healthy forest, and you go away for 3 months, and you come back, and barring some bizarre catastrophe, the forest is still green and lush and healthy. You leave your garden alone for 3 months. It's a jungle or a desert or a little bit of both. So what is it that nature is doing that allows her greenery to do so well, and what are we missing? So permaculture is really trying to answer that, especially with regard to gardens, food production, all of those sorts of things. So what that item you mentioned earlier about perennial crops versus annuals, that's one tool we'd use. Is why plant a seed every single year and till the soil and all of those sorts of things when you could grow a perennial that would do exactly the same thing and save you fertilizer and water and labor and all of that. So that's where permaculture comes into the garden.
Would you classify it as under biomimicry?
I think that's a great way of thinking of it, is that it's really gardening in the image of nature rather than gardening in the image of row crops and artificial fertilizers and all of that.
I'm going to come back to something you were saying earlier, which is permaculture can help us with really all sustainable living practices. So my question is, well, what are the connections that we can draw between permaculture and some of the conditions and the challenges that we face, like water scarcity and climate change, and help draw some connections, if you will.
Yeah. It really has to do with assessing what's going on. Like what are your best local energy sources? What are your best local resources? Looking at the resources that are available to you, and then looking at the things that you need, and try and draw the closest connections between them. Permaculture really is a way of creating connections between things. If we think about what design is, a design is not a bunch of cool stuff thrown out randomly. A design is a bunch of things connected in really meaningful and beneficial ways. And so that's what permaculture is trying to do, is where are the resources that we can use with the smallest ecological footprint, that kind of thing, in our area. What should we do? In some ways it's really very much about local, but that local can be your own yard, your own neighborhood, your own community, your own city, your own bioregion, depending on what it is. You're talking about getting steel, or you're talking about getting snow peas.
Okay. One of the thoughts that I was having when I was doing some of the research was this whole notion of, I think it was like the key line, which is the idea that you really find what's going on your property vis-a-vis water, and you talk about local. You find that natural key line of water descent on your own property. So I think that's what is an example of what you're saying. You try to use what is local first, and it can be what is right in your backyard.
Absolutely.
So,
you know more about that.
Yeah.
Even if you buy, say, an organic food product of some sort, unless you know the farmer and you know where it's coming from, who knows what's going on out there? So the more local you can make these things, the more you know about them, the better chance you're going to be of being ecological.
Cool. Well, so can you say a little bit more about the food forest? You started a bit about that. Can we really feed ourselves completely in our own backyard?
You can certainly grow a lot of the really high value foods, the things that cost you a lot. Something you're probably not going to grow in your own yard are things like grains, or if you eat beef, you're probably not going to have a cow in a little urban yard. But you can plug chickens in really nicely. Chickens are this tremendously multifunctional organism. That's something that we use a lot in permaculture, is the idea of things filling many jobs at once. And so a chicken is a way of, it'll eat your food scraps, it'll pick bugs out of your garden. I've seen gardens that are immaculate because there are chickens there taking the harmful bugs out of your garden. It will provide you with eggs, it'll provide you with manure, it'll provide an alarm. If someone comes into your yard, the chicken will start squawking. It does all these different things, and you don't have to do an awful lot of that work then anymore. The chicken will do this for you, and it can get a lot of the food that you're already throwing out or composting or that sort of thing. So it kind of nests right in, almost literally, but it fits right in to the little spaces that are there.
I love the term food forest. It's very evocative. It just makes you kind of think of abundance, and it's a great term. But I wonder, my next question is about scaling a food forest for commercial production. Is it possible to apply these principles to feed many, many people?
Right. And actually permaculture got started on a much larger scale. It was really broad scale for farmers, big orchards, big grazing lands, those sorts of things, trying to figure out how to conserve water and keep the soil healthy and that sort of thing. So really a lot of what permaculture has been is scaling it down to something smaller. But it's been applied very successfully in Australia, where it got started on very large scale, thousands of acres of grazing land. And also it's been applied in the US on 250 acre scale and that kind of thing. So it definitely works on a big scale.
Wow. And you mentioned a small scale, so how small is small? Because in Portland, I think we have 30 by 50 lots or something like that, and I've got, I don't have a whole lot of room, and the idea of permaculture is very attractive to me, but what can I do in a corner of my yard?
Right. I've actually seen permaculture type gardens on balconies in apartments.
Really?
So teeny little things, just a fruit tree and a planter with a vine twining up it, and a few little herbs planted around the fruit tree, all working together. The herbs will attract the beneficial pollinators that the fruit tree needs and that sort of thing. So you can make it, I could build a little permaculture type garden right on this table if I needed to. So I have one of those small urban yards, and I'm really enjoying being in a small space because there's always room for me to fit another vine, another herb, another little flowering plant, another insect attractor, another bird habitat plant in there. Permaculture is in large part about stacking. We'll put things in layers, just like a forest where you've got the tall trees, the short trees, the shrubs, the smaller shrubs, the herbaceous plants, and even ground covers and roots. You can fit all of that on many, many levels stacked into a little tiny yard.
So it can scale up, it can scale down, but when does it work best?
Because it is often based around perennial plants as far as the gardening aspect is concerned, it will take time for your fruit trees to fruit. Meanwhile, you've got other things going on that you might even pull out after the fruit trees are going and the berry bushes are going. So within about, just as far as time, about 3 to 5 years, you'll suddenly notice everything clicks together, takes off, kind of explodes, and a lot of the work that you were doing in the beginning suddenly lessens a tremendous.
Well, it also seems like you might have to put in some extra effort at the beginning, you know, not only just learning and observing what's going on,
Right.
but then also it's like you have to plant all the seeds, literally and figuratively, to be able to, you know, have a real forest garden, you know, blossom 4 or 5 years down the road, as you say, just all of a sudden erupt.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Usually our yards, any of our landscapes have been so badly damaged somehow, chemical fertilizers or compaction from heavy equipment on them or whatever, that it takes a while to rehabilitate these things. So that upfront work, rehabilitating, creating great soil, harvesting water, all of that will really pay off in the long run tremendously.
Okay, great. Applying permaculture to your existing landscape can seem overwhelming. Designing a permaculture landscape starts with thoughtful observation and careful analysis of your property. It took Mother Nature billions of years to shape the patterns and biodiversity in today's ecosystems. So how can we simple humans be expected to get it right in just a few seasons? Fortunately, there are a growing number of landscape design firms that focus on ecological design approaches like permaculture. Urban Ecosystems is one such company. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Frances Fagan with Sustainable Today, and let's go explore the Green Garden Home. Come along. Today we're going on an adventure in an urban jungle. How does this happen? How can you restore the wilds to an urban setting? Well, here's just the man to let us know. Jason Raschke of Urban Ecosystems. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting us to your green space.
Welcome, Francis.
So this place is wild.
Yeah, it's quite a jungle. It wasn't always like this, though. It was about 5 years ago I bought the place, and when I moved in, it was all grass. And I began taking out all the grass and trying to convert it. I used a combination of plants. I used natives, edibles, and what I call naturescaping plants. There were some invasives, blackberry and ivy, but the biggest invasive plant that I encountered was the grass, basically. Grass is non-native to this area, and it's basically planted throughout the city.
And it takes up a lot of water, a lot of resources to maintain. How did you first become interested in restoration and in this ecological landscaping?
Well, I've been doing landscaping for about 20 years now. I first got interested as a teenager, and in my hometown I ended up building a golf course. We ended up basically destroying an intact forest to build the golf course, and I ended up realizing that a lot of the things that were happening in the landscape industry were detrimental to not only people but the environment. I started a business back in 1994 when I moved to Portland, and I was doing landscape maintenance without any fossil fuel consumption. My goals for the property are, first of all, to restore some of the native habitat that was here, has been lost through conversion into residential areas, and create some habitat for birds and bees and other animals. But also to bring some edibles into the garden and make it so that we're focusing on local production of food.
And sustainability.
Sustainability, that's part of the whole thing.
It's like a market in your backyard, kind of.
Yeah, I try to get as many plants as possible and try to select plants for as many uses as possible. So it's not just something pretty to look at. It's been called a little paradise, a little Eden. Basically, I try to share this space with as many living organisms as possible. I do have raccoons come through, I have squirrels, I have over 25 birds that come through, 25 species. I have 4 chickens. They help me with the gardening, they provide eggs. But basically I'm trying to create a urban oasis.
Speaking of gardening, why don't you tell us about your garden right now?
Well, I'm in the process of putting in my fall and winter garden. We're getting into October here, so transitioning out of the summer crops into some of the cool season crops. A lot of them are broccoli and Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale. Can also do artichokes, but you also want to plant stuff like onions and garlic now, and they'll overwinter, and then you'll have a harvest in spring. So this is the composting area, Francis. This is where I turned all of the green material from the gardens and all the trimmings and everything from the weeding and everything, overgrowth, into this. This is our new pile of compost. This is the fresh pile that will eventually turn into some soil. Really how you do this is you just kind of pour the green material on and layer it in. And every couple months you come in and you turn it. I actually have my chickens come in here and do a lot of the work for me. But eventually that green material will turn into this deep, rich humic matter. Lots of organic debris, which basically contains nitrogen and other carbon and phosphorus and other trace elements that are great for gardening with. This is the organic matter from the yard. The organic material created in the kitchen is brought to a different spot, and it's called a worm box. And the worm box is basically a house for worms. So basically we're closing the loops of the wastes that we're producing on site and reusing them in the garden. So this wildlife hedge is part of my native garden. Basically from this point down, all of the plants are native, and it's basically a demonstration of what can be done with native plants and examples of our native plants. So for instance, this is flowering red currant here, and during the spring, this plant gets just beautiful pink, red fuchsia flowers that hang down as tassels. And this plant, as it comes available, is one of the main food sources for the rufous hummingbird. And again, this is the red osier dogwood, and this has these beautiful white flowers that are now have gone to seed, but it's a good wetland plant. It has these red stems, so during the winter, after the leaves fall off, it'll have visual interest. It'll have these striking red stems. But these basically flank the entrance to one of my, another part of my garden. It's called, the technique that I've used in it is this keyhole garden. Basically the pathway leading in is in the shape of a keyhole. The central area in here is like the top of the key, but it basically opens up into a room, and it's flanked by all of these other native plants.
It's like a beautiful, like, little secret garden.
Exactly. I purposefully leave the branches covering the opening so that it seems like you're entering into another room. I like to create rooms in the garden, try to bring the outside in, the inside out, and try to make the fine line between what's going on. And this naturally lends itself to being a space. It has this beautiful Sitka spruce. The Sitka spruce is a native species. It's found on our coast, and I basically have planted it with associate plants that are found naturally with this plant. For instance, this Oregon grape. The Oregon grape is a native species that can be used for jams, but the root of this plant was used extensively by Native Americans. It has a yellow pigment in it that can be used to make dyes for basketry and other types of usable implements, I guess.
It's a multitasking plant.
Yeah, so basically that's one of my criteria for plants is it's not just about how they look. Most plants intrinsically have this value of being nice to look at. It's these other plants that have uses that are more attractive to me.
So finally, Jason, this is yet another beautiful space.
Yeah, this is where I like to spend a lot of my time. It's basically, it's a garden, but it's a little bit different. It's an area where people can come together and enjoy the garden. It's a place where I like to sit and read, or sit with my boys and have a fire at night and do some stargazing or do drumming, but basically just sit around and kind of enjoy other people's company. I really enjoyed the visit and trying to get out some of the information to people and trying to help people bring some balance back into their yards and create an ecological landscape.
Well, you've definitely done it here. So this is Francis Fagan, bringing you the tools to be sustainable today.
So, Toby, we're going to turn things a little bit more serious now. We've talked about the gardening aspects of permaculture, but let's talk a little bit about how permaculture conceptually can help communities make the transition to energy descent. And by that, I mean accommodate the shift from a fossil fuel-based economy to renewable energy resources.
Right.
It's a deep question.
Well, one of permaculture's strengths, as I mentioned earlier, is about assessing, looking at the resources you have available and looking at the needs. And when it comes to things like energy descent, permaculture is a really great set of tools, because I think one of the things we do in our culture a lot is we look for that magic bullet. We're looking for that one thing. You know, is it going to be solar that's going to replace oil? Is it going to be wind? And what permaculture would say is it's going to be a blend of all of these and what's best in your region. You know, if you live in the Columbia River Gorge, wind is going to be kind of a slam dunk there. But if
Portland, it's obviously solar.
Right, completely,
Right,
yes.
yeah.
Those cloudy days are just almost enough to run solar. Yeah, right, exactly. But
Hey, we get as much solar, rays here as in Germany, which is the #1
Right.
solar.
Right.
exactly.
nation.
And I think Portland would be a really good example of a place that's going to have a mix. We've got
Yeah.
some hydro, we'll be using a little fossil fuel for a while longer, we can use solar sometimes of the year, wind sometimes of the year, and that would be a very permacultural approach, because it's not a good idea to be reliant on one thing, as I think we're going to be learning more and more with the oil situation. And when you have a blend like that, you're much more resilient. So permaculture, I think, is a really good tool to help us assess what our best resources are, how to plug them in. And I like to think of permaculture as a tool for a fear-free future that we're running around kind of scared. Exactly,
Wow.
right, F cubed.
F cube concept. I think
We're-
I'm going to trademark that right now.
I think someone else already did. But,
Probably.
right.
And I thought you were going to talk a little bit about food miles as it associated
right.
with permaculture and fossil fuels. Maybe I'm way off base about that, but is there a connection with permaculture with that?
There definitely is. One of the things that permaculture looks at is what are the best things to have really close to you, and then what is okay to have a little bit further away. So you might want to be growing the really high value stuff in your own yard, things that would cost you a lot, stuff you really like to eat, stuff that's really appropriate for your climate. But then something like wheat, you're probably not going to grow a lot of wheat in your own yard. So that's okay to have outside of the urban area.
Right,
that
okay,
sort of
that
thing.
makes sense.
So
Oh,
there's a
okay, I get the
hierarchy.
connection now.
Right.
Right. So almost like plant the stuff that you're going to use a lot and that you like a lot, if you can, right there
Right.
next to your back door.
Yeah, and then you can have a farmer's market nearby for some other things, and community-supported agriculture a little further away for other things, and then outside the town there might be grain fields, and then maybe there's something shipped from far away every now and then. But right now we have a situation where everything is shipped from far away. And we're
So
not
part of
gonna
this
do
is
that.
actually just shifting our own mindsets. It's not just the permaculture design principles. It's actually getting into our mindsets.
Right,
as well.
right. There actually are a number of permaculture principles that really have to do more with attitudes than actual tricks that we've learned from nature.
Well, that's the question I was just going to ask you about, which is, so what is those mindsets or those other aspects to permaculture that can help us with other aspects of our lives?
Right. One is that it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you've kind of tracked your mistakes. I'm sure every now and then there's a catastrophic mistake that's an absolute disaster, but those are pretty rare. Usually, if you learn from your mistakes, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying something new. And so you will make mistakes. Be patient with yourself, it's okay, and just learn from those mistakes. So that's one of those attitudes that I think is really important, because you can be paralyzed. That's not sustainable, I shouldn't do that, is something that, well, do it a little bit until you can find something better to do. It's okay.
I call that, I live my life by do-overs. I do a lot of do-overs in my life. I swear I've planted one plant 3 different times in 3 different places in my yard, just trying to get it to the right spot. Now, what is social permaculture? What's that referring to?
The principles that apply to your garden as far as making connections between things, or multiple uses for one thing, or having backup systems in place, or all those sorts of things, they apply perfectly well to people, groups of people, organizations, and those sorts of things. I mean, we talk about how important networking is, and all networking is creating connections that benefit all the members of the group. And that's a totally permacultural idea, is you have something I need, I have something you need, and we work together, and it winds up being better off than either one of us thought it was going to be. So social networks are a perfect example of kind of applying permaculture principles. So after learning how permaculture works in nature and in the garden, a lot of people who are doing it realize, well, this could apply to my nonprofit organization, or my business, or even my family, or my marriage, or something like that.
It's like the open source version for nature.
Right, exactly, right. Yep, you can observe nature and learn from it, and you'll find that those principles apply to every aspect of your life.
So how about economic policy? You and I were talking earlier about some of the parallels that I found really interesting in your book, and ideas like invasive species kind of evoked ideas of immigration and intervention and non-intervention in different things that are going on in your garden. Reminded me of, the invisible hand and Mother Nature, and I found that really fascinating.
Right.
Like, are you writing socialist propaganda in your book, or is it capitalist propaganda mixed into your book?
A little of both, I think.
Good.
Yes, because
Healthy balance.
nature would try everything.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, I mean, another idea that I think really applies here in terms of business and economics is the idea of succession. That the most dangerous time for a new business is right at the beginning, and you can think of that as kind of the pioneer species, the first one to get there and colonize. And it's wide open, but it's pretty scary, and there aren't a lot of resources around. And that's what nature's doing when it sends in pioneer species, to build the soil and cultivate the conditions for later phases and more richness and more fertility to occur. So you get a young business that's needs a lot of loans and infusions and is kind of struggling. And so what do you do to help get you to the mature phase? You go get advisors, you look at models that already work, and you try and move yourself down that path of succession. So that's an example from nature where we're trying to strengthen businesses by moving them past those dangerous first couple of years as quickly as possible.
Do you find that there are permaculture consultants for business? I mean, are there actual consultants explicitly applying these principles to startups?
Yeah, very definitely. There are, particularly in Southern California, for some reason, there are a number of permaculture consultants down there who are doing real economic work and looking at businesses and how can we apply these principles. Because businesses, in a lot of ways, are kind of like living organisms. They have a metabolism, they need to take in resources, they create things, they grow, all of that. So you can apply these principles to businesses very easily.
Right. Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about the back to the food forest idea, right? So you have this. It's very much a layering, stacking, living system, and you got organizational forests just the same way. Certain people get to be on the top floor, and others are down there on the ground.
And the ones that learn to use resources the best are the ones that are going to succeed, and it's the same in nature or in business.
Right.
What would permaculture philosophy say, though, about the pioneer plants that ultimately are replaced in succession? Is that where the parallel falls down? Because some startups, they are pioneers, but then they last, and they, like a Google, takes over an entire category, and then more categories. That doesn't really happen, does it? Eventually, well, I guess in the long term, you would say everything levels out?
Well, I don't think you can apply the analogy too awfully far, but a business changes its form as it goes from small to larger. You know, I've been in companies that have gone from small to big, and they're completely unrecognizable. You know, they may have the same name, and so it would be something very similar to moving from pioneer species to a little bit mature ones. But in a business, it's the same business, but you know, the employees might be completely different. The CEO might be a different person. You know, we all know the founder syndrome and those sorts of things, where the first person to start the business might not be the right person to be running it 10 years later. So there's an evolution like that.
Evolution, that's an interesting concept.
Yes.
You should write about that.
There we go. Yeah, controversy.
But that'll be your next book.
Right.
That'll be your next book. Now, we were talking about that there's a lot of permaculture, specialists in California. Well, it looks like there's a growing trend to get a permaculture certificate. So, what happens when you become a certified permaculturist? What is that all about? What does it take? What's the value of that? How do you go about doing that? I might want that as my next career. So can you tell us about that?
Right. Well, yeah. To try and keep the permaculture standards high, I mean, it's a coined word, permanent culture combined together. So it's its own. It's not trademarked, but it is a term that was coined, and to make sure that it doesn't get diluted and get turned into something that it doesn't really mean, there is a certification course that you take, which is 12 to 14 days of instruction. So roughly it's the equivalent of like 2 semesters in college, I'd say is roughly what it is. And at the end of that time, and part of the procedure is that you learn all the different topics that permaculture covers, and then you do a design project with a group of other people, and you do a presentation at the end of the course, and it's great fun. And what we're finding is many of these design projects are actually getting implemented now. So people are actually, it seems like it's just an exercise, but it turns into something that's really gets done out in the real world. And at the end of that, you then are certified, which simply means that you have begun the path. You know, a 2-week course, a 14-day course is not going to make you a fully trained permaculturist, but it will give you the grounding so that then you can go on and there's a 2-year diploma program if you want to. You can work as an intern underneath a mentor or in relationship with someone to learn more. But it is a way of making sure that the standards are applied, and that everyone who takes the permaculture design certification course shares a common body of knowledge.
Great. Now, in terms of just a quick little question here, I've always associated permaculture with food, with gardens and agriculture. So, of the certification, about what percentage is really going after the gardening kind of application?
I'd say about half of the course at least is directly applicable to gardening, although we're talking about design methods that could be applied to businesses as easily as a garden. We're talking about water conservation that you could apply in your house as well as in a garden. Energy, same kind of thing. So there's probably only 2 or 3 days of the course that's really focused on plants and gardening and that sort of thing, but there's a bigger kind of umbrella there that all can be applied to gardening or other things.
Gosh, I'm learning a lot. Well, if all this talk about food forests is making you hungry, but you can't wait for your own permaculture garden to blossom, then don't worry. Through a CSA or a community-supported agriculture membership, you can enjoy fresh, local, and nutritious produce grown by trained gardeners using sustainable growing methods. In today's Community Spotlight, Mo McKenna shows us how the Singer Hill Gardens puts a new twist on the CSA by bringing together gardeners, homeowners, and consumers that want to support sustainable agriculture.
Hi, I'm Mo McKenna, and I'm the board chair of Singer Hill Gardens, and we are a backyard, urban, community-supported agriculture. Shareholders buy in at the beginning of the season, and we provide them with a share of the bounty that comes off our properties. And then also we have the people who loan us their backyards, we give them a share of the vegetables, and we also trade a lot with people as well. So Jessica is by our propagation master. She really took it on and she grew all of our starts.
It was really tough in my garage, just making sure there was enough air circulation, and every plant, I had to constantly rotate twice a day the plants under the lights, and it would, it's always better to have them outside under natural light in a greenhouse.
We don't have a greenhouse, so Jessica and I planted lots of starts in my kitchen, and we washed out black pots in my bathtub, and it worked. I think my partner and I think Jessica's husband too at some point were like, when is the house going to stop smelling like dirt? So we need to plant all sorts of things. We're not going to have space to plant pole beans.
What are we doing with those guys?
How do you decide what to plant?
Well, we decide what we like to eat. It's part of community-supported agriculture is that we plant a wide variety of crops, and so even if we miss out on a few different crops, there's plenty of other things to eat. We are in Brittany Asher's backyard garden, and I'm here to introduce Tamara Eden, and she was one of the first ones involved with the project.
We were looking for landowners that were really excited about this project and were willing to actually let us use their land in exchange for produce over the course of the season. A lot of farms are kind of out in the country and involve a lot longer distance to travel to get out there, and basically kind of using more energy as opposed to growing food in your neighbor's backyard and then giving it directly to that community.
We believe in the local, taking care of local folks and teaching people about gardening. We're big gardeners ourselves, so we thought, you know, if we can be part of something bigger, that would be great. We have a big garden and lots of times we don't harvest everything that's there, and that breaks my heart.
We cultivated 16,000 square feet. So not a lot. We have this backyard, which is 4,000 square feet tilled. Tom Hopkins' place is about 10,000 square feet. And then we have 3 other pretty small properties, so less than 1,000 square feet each.
My wife is the director of Hera Community School. This is something that she believes in and that I believe in, and we are happy to participate in with her school, Hera Community School. So it's exciting. I think it teaches the right lessons and habits to young people and what they're going to need to make it in the future. If we're going to be more environmentally friendly and sustainable for ourselves, we have to maximize all of our space and time and not just keeping it off at a distance and allowing other people to be the specialists. We have to be the opportunivores, if you will, and take care of it and feed ourselves, and we're able to do that, and this just proves that that's exactly the case.
My name is Mike Sump. I'm one of the farmers. I've joined for the movement of the whole local food thing and sustaining lives of people who need food when they're losing other things. I had realized all along that I had no access to my backyard, and so I had entertained the thought and went ahead and executed it because of the garden. I cut a hole in the back of my garage, so now we drive the tractor back through there and lower it down off the curb to get into the backyard, and so I affectionately call it the hole-in-the-wall garden because the hole in the wall makes the garden possible. I appreciate the fact that we were able to donate food to people who need it when they're possibly losing jobs, possibly losing homes, belongings. I don't want them to be worried ever about being able to feed their kids or choosing between diapers and groceries or any of these kind of issues. And so I might be sneaking away food to give that you don't even know about.
It's nice to work with different levels of organizations, people who are doing this on a very grassroots level and very, the system is built around a sustainable model, and also to work with people who are working in a much more commercial system and they're still trying to bring in local, sustainable foods.
And we try to grow things that Monsanto does not own, although that's increasingly difficult, and it's a serious issue, you guys. Research who owns your patent on your varieties. Research it.
FDA does require processors to have a permit, but we're exempt because we're actually producing the food. Food is such an important thing that it almost seems like the regulations should be stricter. And we sometimes think, oh, well, we should have some regulation for this, and we go out and we find that there's nothing. We're talking about homeland security all the time, and how to make our lifestyle more secure in this country and protect our family. And I think eating local is like one of the most important things you can do, because there's not a lot of regulation around our food. And if you think the FDA is coming out and surveying every farm and what practices they're doing, you're not. And the best thing you can do to protect yourself is really to know who's growing your food and how it's being grown. So Max, what was your experience as a farmer before you came to this project?
I have been having my own vegetable garden for about 6 or 7 years, and I've always been really experimental with it, growing all kinds of unusual varieties as a hobby. And I think in my second year of growing vegetables and fruits, I decided to start volunteering on different farms. And so I volunteered at the Portland Permaculture Institute, Lusher Farm for a couple years, different gardening and farm projects around the city. And this is my first experience and foray into doing it as a business model and as something that, you know, is entrepreneurial like this. This gets almost all of the water off the salad mix. And we basically just dry a big mountain of it and then fluff it all together at the end.
We pack 28 shares a week right now, and we could probably be packing 50 this part of the season. We hope to probably sell 100 shares next year, which is growing by a lot, 400%. All of us want to do this. We would like to scale back our other jobs and make our part-time farming a full-time thing, or near full-time, and so we need to be making money in order to make that happen. There's been some local restaurants here in Oregon City that have been buying our produce. Singer Hill Cafe buys shares from us. We've been working with the folks at Bon Appetit, and we were able to sell them some tomatoes today, and then in the future we're going to work with them on, I was talking with their executive chef, and growing specific crops for them through their Farm to Fork program that gets local food into the cafeterias of colleges.
Siberian kale and red Russian kale.
I've been kind of part of this movement for 7 years now. I think that it's a really tough adjustment to eat with the seasons, and it's really difficult to know what to do with raw food, because a lot of us are raised with really processed foods, and we have to recognize that our members might not know what to do with something. And so my harvest notes are they come every week, and they're just an accompaniment to the box so that people can understand what's going on.
Couldn't fit everything in this week, so you get a bag of kale.
Oh,
too.
thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Oh, blessings and peace, young lady.
Yes,
We'll
yes.
see you
We are Singer Hill Gardens, bringing you the tools to be sustainable today.
You know, I thought about joining a CSA, but I was worried that it'd just be too much food for one person. Then I learned that some of my friends had pulled together and split a CSA membership, so I'm thinking about trying that next year.
Well, I did that with a couple of friends this past year, and so we did a half, and then we did each a third of that, and that was plenty of food for us. So I'd encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna try it.
All right. Well, and we also had so much extra composting materials that my little worms were happy campers. Well, or maybe I should say happy binners. So on this month's Go Green with Jean, I'm going to show you how to compost with your 1,000 best buddies. It looks like a scene from a creepy, crawling movie, doesn't it? But it's really just worm poop, our vermicompost, and it's premium stuff. I'm harvesting the castings, worm poop, from my worm bin today. Let me show you how. I lay out a plastic tarp, dump out all the contents from the bin, scrape out the stuff that's on the bottom, and scoop it up into heaps. I turn on a bright light above, and the worms will dive into the center to get out of the light. And then we wait about 15 minutes or so. Almost a quarter of household waste is food scraps. Permaculture, or composting with worms, is a fast way to get that waste into the natural cycle of things, rather than packing it away in a landfill. Worms produce a rich, dark soil that I add to my herb pots and eventually to my garden. Once I start gardening, that is. To harvest the castings, we gotta start at the beginning. Let's make a worm bin. You could buy a nifty and expensive pre-made bin, or use an old trunk or drawer, or build a simple wooden box. I like to make mine out of durable plastic containers, 8 to 16 inches deep. And then I drill holes 3/8 of an inch in diameter on the sides and on the bottom for drainage and aeration. And then you're good to go. Don't worry about the worms wanting to crawl out. Their food's going to be inside the bin. Now, back to the heaps. Just scoop off the dirt from the sides and the top until you see the worms diving down. Ah, there they are. You can also get it from the sides. And then put that compost over here on the screen and come back and reshape the pile.
Oh, looky that one.
There we go. And now what? We wait. This is a good time to make our bed. The worm bed, that is. Worms like shredded newspaper, cardboard, paper egg cartons, but no shiny papers, okay? Brown leaves, peat moss, coconut husk, hey, and sawdust is great. And what do you do with the old financial statements? Shred them up and put them in. And you can use any combination of this material as long as you leave some pockets of air in the bedding. So the bedding needs to be moist but not soggy, just like that. And throw in some dirt for the grit that the worms need for digestion, and you're done. Now let's go see how far my worms have buried themselves. Ah, they're getting deeper and deeper. Let's get all the good stuff off, okay? You'll want to use a colander or a screening material like this to separate the compost from the biomatter that's not quite decomposed yet. You'll want to save that for later. You might find a few worms in here too. Just save those because we'll put those into the new bin. And this is the gold. And to think, it came from food waste. I'm not going to waste 1 tablespoon of this super plant food. So, what kind of food do worms like to eat? Fruit peels and pulp, but no citrus, it's too acidic. I put seed sacks for my melons and avocado and peach pits into my compost pile outside because they decompose too slowly.
We love veggie scraps and coffee grounds too.
You guys know that too many coffee grounds upset your tummies. Really, I give them only a little bit. The rest go outside. Coffee filters decompose nicely, and tea bags too.
Bread. We love bread. So soft and chewy.
Hey, that's only good for you if you hold the mayo. And hold the butter too. No dairy or oily products, no fish or meat, and nothing moldy if you want to avoid odor and pest problems. To expedite decomposition, chop up the food into small bits before putting it into the worm bin. Let's see if the heaps are done. It's the return of the worms. It's time for Biddy Bye for my buddies. To assemble a worm bin, just fill it 3/4 full of bedding. Now it's the worms. And I'm going to pick this up. And now you add the food. Now top that with just a couple of more inches of bedding. And then add this plastic. That sheet will help reduce odor, retain moisture, and help prevent fruit flies. My worm bins are in the entry room off the garage. You can keep worms in the garage itself, or outside on a balcony, or even under the sink. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's between 50 and 80 degrees. Worms are so sensitive. I'm Jean Bauman, bringing you the tools to be sustainable today. I'm an everyday gal, making my everyday choices count. And you can too. Now, where do you get worms if you're just starting out? Well, you can look on the web. There are suppliers all over the place. Or you can ask a friend like me for some. We always have a handful of buddies that we're willing to share.
So I have held off on a big compost bin, but I have been thinking about a worm bin, and it's good to hear that you've got one. But I'm not a big fan of worms, actually, though I was wondering if maybe next time that you harvest those worm castings, or I guess really that's worm poop.
Yeah,
maybe
worm poop.
you
If you
could
want to
make me a
say it
bin.
on air, go
Yeah,
ahead. Worm
so
poop.
You'll make me a bin then?
Absolutely. The
Great.
next bin is
Thank
yours.
you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Will you take care of it too? Clean it out for me?
Hey,
Yeah.
we can co-harvest.
Okay.
I've been known to have worm poop harvesting
No
parties.
kidding.
Yes,
Wow.
they're very fun. And we share in the poop. Hey, so Toby, before we close for the evening, one last question for you. What do you think it will take for permaculture to really take off? Because it seems like it's still kind of an alternative lifestyle, just talked about in small circles. So what will it take to really get going, to really blossom?
I think it is alternative right now because it's not really needed in American culture. We've still got plenty of oil for the time being, plenty of soil, food, all of that. But I think a lot of us are expecting, certainly resources are going to get a lot more expensive. I think there's just no way that we're going to continue with the cheap oil age that we've had. And as that occurs, there really will be a need to do things more sustainably. And permaculture offers a really great set of tools for doing that. So it's one of those things that I kind of say, well, I think it's all just going to work itself right out. Because as there really becomes a need and more people are thinking, you know, I've got to conserve gas because it's too expensive and my heating bill is too much and food is really expensive and all of those sorts of things. I think that will be the big driving force. But what we're trying to do is get systems in place so that we're ready when that happens, when lots of people turn to permaculture and say, help us, make sure that we have models there already that people can follow.
You know, what I have found so interesting about reading about permaculture is the idea of not working against Mother Nature, right? Letting her do the work and the efficiency that results from that. And to say that really appeals to kind of the lazy side of me, right? So I'm hoping that when I try it out, you know, it'll prove to be good, right for me, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. The lazy me. Yeah.
Well, anyone who has visited my backyard can see that we're actually two peas in a pod because I have quite the weed patch back there. But I've also learned from some research, and we didn't talk about it here, that weeds are really a function of poor design. So I'm going to let my brain or a permaculture specialist help me out on that. What do you think about that, Toby?
Well, if you've got weeds, you've created the conditions for weeds to occur, and we can design them right out of your garden.
I like it. Permaculture is sounding better and better.
Well, I want to thank you, Toby, for being our guest today.
Well, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And that's it for our show today. To learn more about the Center for Sustainable Today events and projects, please visit our website at sustainabletoday.org. Until the next time, I'm Will Volota.
And I'm Jane Bauman, asking you to make every choice count, both at work and at home, as you become more sustainable today.
There's a big, beautiful planet in the sky. It's my home, it's where I live. You and many others live here too. The earth is our home, it's where we live. We can feel the power of the noonday sun, a blazing ball of fire up above, shining light and warmth enough for everyone, a gift to every nation from a star. There's a big, beautiful planet in the sky. It's my home, it's where I live. You and many others